It must be nice to always believe you know better. To always think you're the smartest person in the room.
No, it's awful.
That's from the Oscar-nominated screenplay of Broadcast News, written by James L. Brooks. And joining me now is Nobel Prize-winning economist Paul Krugman. He is the columnist for the New York Times, a professor of economics at Princeton University, and he is always the smartest person in the room. His new book, End This Depression Now. Paul, I've been wanting to ask you for a long time, how awful is it being you these days, watching the craziest, I think possibly, you tell me, is this the stupidest public discussion of economics that this country has had since Keynes?
It probably is. You know, we had some pretty stupid discussions in the 30s, but they were only stupid after the fact because people didn't actually know how the thing worked. We have the knowledge. We have the tools. That's what drives me crazy right now, is that we actually have everything we need. You know, there have been some surprises, but by and large, this is a well-understood script. We know exactly what we should be doing. The tools are there. We could be out of this depression, which it really is. It is a depression. We could be out of it faster than anyone now imagines, and we're insistently doing the wrong things. Terrible for me, but of course much worse for the 13 million people who are out of work and the 3.9 million who've been out of work for more than a year, and we're not doing anything for them.
Now, in your book, you trace some of the political history of Keynesian economics. John Maynard Keynes, a British economist who came out with some ideas that were considered radical at the time, but started to take hold over time. You talk about William Buckley and other old-line conservatives opposing everything about Keynesian economics. But then, by the time we get to President Nixon actually said, people think he said, we're all Keynesians now. You point out that it was the conservative economist Milton Friedman who said that. Nixon's actual words were, I am now a Keynesian in economics. How did we go from there, where this was kind of the accepted math of economics, to where we are now?
Yeah. So I've actually been thinking about this. If this crisis had struck in 1971, which is the year Nixon said that, we would have dealt with it effectively. So somehow we moved backwards. We lost it. And what happened is, part of it is just the polarization. Republicans will vote against anything that President Obama proposes. If he wanted to honor motherhood, they'd be against it. But also, rich, billionaires have never liked Keynesian economics for a couple of reasons. One is that it suggests that the government can do some good. And if the government can do some good, then maybe the government needs to raise some taxes, which means taxing them. It also suggests that the government can solve a slump like this. And what business people, particularly what corporations love, is they love to talk about confidence, because that gives them power. If you say, well, you mustn't say anything nasty about us, and you mustn't annoy us, because you have to have confidence to get us out. And if you can say, no, actually, we don't need confidence, what we actually need is a jobs program, they've lost that lever over policy. So there's been this onslaught on Keynesian economics, on the economics that we understood, the economics that worked. I mean, the last 3 years had been a kind of acid test for which views of the economy work, and guess what? Good old Keynesian economics has tracked this crisis very, very well. The other views have been completely wrong, but there was a campaign to drive that out of the discussion, which has ended up paralyzing us in this crisis we now face.
And Paul, just for the audience, what would be the bullet points of what the Keynesian approach would have been for President Obama in 2009 taking on this crisis?
First and foremost, the private sector is not willing to spend. It's not able to spend because it's got some problems, hangover from the financial crisis. This is when you want the government to spend to step into the breach. That's almost the principal bullet point. Everything else is kind of secondary. There are other things you should be doing. We should be doing a lot of mortgage debt relief. We should have the Federal Reserve doing more expansionary policy. A little bit of inflation would be helpful. But the core thing is, now is the time for the government to spend. Later on, we can talk about it. Keynes said the boom, not the slump, is the time for austerity. This is the slump. This is not the time for austerity. We should not be laying off hundreds of thousands of school teachers. We should be adding government employees. So we've done this precisely wrong.
Yeah, I think because you've been saying from the start, for example, that the stimulus package should have been much bigger to take on the crisis that we were facing, and you were right about that. I think some people have labeled you, people on the right have labeled you as someone who's not at all interested in trying to deal with the deficit or deal with government overspending in any form where it might occur. But more than anything else, what you're talking about, whether before you get into any specifics of what you might cut at some point, is when do you do this? When do you cut? When do you spend? Those are the most important decisions, more so than even how much those things might be.
Right, depression conditions are different. When you're in a depression, when the economy is flat on its back, when the Federal Reserve has cut the interest rates it controls directly all the way to zero and can't cut any further, that's a time when cutting spending is a disaster. It's actually a disaster not just because it leads to higher unemployment and it shrinks the economy. It doesn't even help the budget position because the economy shrinks, tax revenue goes down, long-term unemployment undercuts the economy's long-run productive capacity, which means lower tax revenue in the future. It's pretty much a slam dunk, if I can say that at this point, cutting spending, the austerity policies are a lose-lose proposition on every front, even on the debt front. So now, give me an economy that's not in a depression, an economy that is doing reasonably well, and it's a very different story. I was actually a big deficit hawk when George Bush was trying to, it ran through tax cuts that were unfunded, ran through unsupported wars without any revenue source to pay for them. That was a really bad time to be running deficits. But right now is the wrong time to obsess over the deficit. Incredibly misguided obsession to have right now.
When I was studying economics in college, I can tell you the economics faculty used to very clearly look down their noses across the river at the business school, the Harvard Business School. And now I think with this Harvard Business School candidate for president, we can see why. I want to listen to what he said about how young people should handle the massive expense of going to college. Let's listen to that.
This attack of success is very different than what we've seen in our country's history. We've always encouraged young people, take a shot, go for it, take a risk, get the education, borrow money if you have to from your parents, start a business.
$40,000, $50,000 tuitions, borrow money from your parents. He seems to think, Paul, that when we say students can't afford a college education, he thinks we literally mean just that student. We mean the student, their parents, their cousins, everybody who they could possibly get any money from are tapped out. They can't afford it. He doesn't seem to know that.
Yeah, there's a special Romney touch, which is this apparent complete inability to put himself in the shoes of someone else, to understand that other people don't grow up as the children of successful business executives. So, all right, that's really distinctive. I don't think we've ever seen anything quite that obtuse, if you like, in a candidate before. The main point is what he's not grasping is the sheer extent of the suffering that's going on in this economy, and the fact that the policies he's advocating would make it worse. I mean, we've just in effect carried out a monstrous experiment on the workers of pretty much the whole Western world. We said, okay, we have this theory that says slash government spending in a depressed economy and prosperity will follow because we'll have confidence. As I've been saying, that the confidence fairy will come and make it all right. And you can see the results all around. Take a look at the countries where the austerity has been most severe. Look at the Irish, we've been patting them on the head saying, good boys, you've been doing the right thing, austerity, that's the stuff. 15% unemployment, right? And so Romney is saying, well, let's do more of that. Let's make things worse, but individuals can make their way by borrowing money from their parents. Unbelievable. And
I want you to take credit for this. Everything that has happened in Europe as a result of these austerity measures, you predicted. Paul Krugman, thank you very much for joining me tonight, and thank you for being right about everything.
My wife wouldn't agree, but thank you.
Okay.